are set to expire. The Republican proposal would also see continued construction of a wall, mandate more funding to hire border agents, and allow suspension of asylum seekers entering the United States. The House will continue debate on the measure on Thursday.
I rise in strong support of House Resolution 2, the Secure the Border Act of 2023. Last year, Republicans made a commitment to America to secure our borders, protect our nation, and safeguard our communities. Today, House Republicans are delivering on that promise. No matter where you sit on the political spectrum, it is undeniable that we are in the midst of a severe border crisis. In just over 2 years, President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas have intentionally turned our nation's border into a place of chaos and devastation, one controlled by the drug cartels. The administration's refusal to enforce the law or implement effective policies to secure the border has led us to this point, completely dismantling any semblance of law and order. Over the past several months, the members of the Committee on Homeland Security have been hard at work crafting a solution to address the administration's self-inflicted crisis at our borders. With input from our colleagues across the Republican conference, as well as Border Patrol agents, victims of illegal alien crime and the drug crisis, small business owners, state and local law enforcement, and farmers and ranchers, the committee has taken the time to fully understand Secretary Mayorkas' record-breaking humanitarian crisis. These are the everyday Americans bearing the brunt of this crisis, who are all too often overlooked by the media and the D.C. Beltway. The numbers that they and now all Americans are facing are staggering. More than 5 million encounters at the southwest border since President Biden took office. Over 1.4 million known gotaways since February 2021. 193 aliens on the terrorist watch list encountered along the southwest border, trying to enter the country between ports of entry from fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 2023. Over 14,000 pounds of fentanyl seized in fiscal year 23, enough to kill the entire U.S. population 9.5 times. Over 61,000 criminal aliens arrested by CBP attempting to cross the U.S. borders since the beginning of FY 2021. And just as we think it can't get any worse, tomorrow marks the end of the only tool that Customs and Border Protection has left under the administration, Title 42. As we've approached the end of Title 42 the past few days, CBP has been reporting an even greater increase in the number of alien encounters and gotaways, which are already off the charts. Whether my colleagues on the other side want to admit it or not, Mr. Biden and Mr. Mayorkas' border crisis has turned every state into a border state, and the American people have had enough. From a record number of fentanyl deaths to rising crime, it is the families and communities across America that are left to pay the price of this administration's open borders and anti-security policies. These policies are enriching and emboldening transnational criminal organizations who have increasingly threatened the safety and security of all Americans. But we're here with a solution. Thanks to the hard work of many members across multiple committees, House Resolution 2 requires the administration to secure the border, enforce the law, reduce illegal immigration once again. Specifically, Division A of the bill addresses the immediate impact of the border crisis by focusing on mitigating and stopping the surge of illegal border crossers and illicit drugs that are flowing across our borders between ports of entry. Over 30 years ago, the United States government began building the border barrier system. We've heard from frontline agents on the ground that an effective border barrier system is a proven critical component in deterring and discouraging illegal activity. That is why House Resolution 2 directs the Secretary of Homeland Security to immediately resume construction of the border wall. The bill requires at least 900 miles of wall to be built, using the materials that American taxpayers have already paid for, but that under President Biden and laying unused and left to deteriorate in the desert. This bill makes targeted investments in border technology that not only supplements the border wall system, but also integrates new, advanced, and improved technologies into the Border Patrol operations that will prioritize frontline personal safety and the detection of illicit activity. We know that Border Patrol agents are leaving at a faster rate than the CBP commissioner can hire them. Under the Biden administration, Border Patrol agents are stretched thin, both physically and mentally. They are overwhelmed and overworked. Customs and Border Protection agents are leaving before reaching their retirement eligibility because of poor working conditions and low morale due to a horrendous lack of support from the Biden administration and the inability to do what they signed up to do, enforce the law. During the committee's field hearing on March 15th, Border Patrol Chief Raul Ortiz testified that he needs approximately 22,000 agents to achieve Border Patrol's mission. HR2 mandates CBP expand their force by over 3,000 agents to reach that total of 22,000 agents. The bill also aims to return agents back to their law enforcement duties in the field by ensuring they are not responsible for serving as processing coordinators, something that the Biden administration is forcing highly trained law enforcement agents to do. The bill addresses the retention challenges that Border Patrol is facing by providing qualified agents with a retention bonus. They need to know that all of us in Congress have their back and appreciate their sacrifice. The Department of Homeland Security has made very blatant attempts to bury the release of its monthly border statistics or withhold certain information from the public. That is why HR2 requires DHS to publicly disclose all monthly data, including known gotaways and known or suspected terrorists, before the 7th day of each month. Congress will not tolerate this administration's lack of transparency to the American people, who deserve to know who and what is coming into our country. To further enhance border security measures, this bill increases support for Operation Stone Garden, a grant program that provides funds to state and local and tribal law enforcement agencies that are forced to deal directly with the crisis given the administration's complete dereliction of duty. Under HR2, Operation Stone Garden grants will be increased to $110 million per year, and we know this support can't come soon enough for our state and local law enforcement. I urge my colleagues to support HR2. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong opposition to the Child Deportation Act. This cruel, inhumane, and unworkable bill was written in an extreme mega Republican echo chamber. Consider HR2 today. Under a closed rule is a cynical move on the part of Republicans to exploit the operational challenges associated with the lifting of Title 42 public health restrictions. Republicans have a short memory. Just in February, they voted to lift Title 42 when they voted to lift the COVID-19 health emergency. It sets Customs and Border Protection up for failure by shifting all processing to ports of entry without providing any additional resources. To make matters worse, it would bar CBP from leveraging technology to process migrants in an orderly way. HR2 doesn't fund a single new officer at our ports of entry, where more than 90% of fentanyl is interdicted. In committee, we tried to get an additional 1,700 officers to build greater capacity, but Republicans refused to do it. Furthermore, this xenophobic bill would strip DHS funding from any community or religious organization that helps migrants. The language is so broad that an organization that places water in a remote area of the desert or provides a pregnant mother a safe place to sleep would be ineligible for DHS funding. It is so broad that they may be refused Homeland Security grants to help protect their facilities. Denying assistance to nonprofits is just plain shameful, particularly after what we saw in Brownsville this past weekend. There is reporting that a man who rammed his SUV into a crowd outside a migrant shelter, killing 8 and injuring at least 10 others, was fueled by invasion and alien rhetoric. My heart goes out to everyone hurt by this senseless act of violence. The language in this bill is so far-reaching that it would force the American Red Cross to verify every person's immigration status before providing life-saving services. Can you imagine if they had to say, show your papers before evacuating people? That's just inhumane. And get this, HR2 is so broadly written that it would actually impede detention and deportation. Mr. Speaker, Fox News viewers who support deporting migrants should take a look at Section 115C in Division A. If enacted, it would prohibit DHS from contracting with any non-governmental organization to transport or shelter, quote, inadmissible aliens, unquote. This language would prevent ICE from contracting with private companies to facilitate deportation or provide detention space because these companies are non-governmental organizations. Yes, you heard that right. This bill is so poorly written that it could actually prevent ICE from deporting people. Over the next 2 hours, Democrats will discuss many other problematic provisions of this extreme mega bill that Republicans cobbled together and that we learned yesterday would blow a $6.1 billion hole in the budget. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this Child Deportation Act, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Mississippi reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank the chairman and thank Mr. Speaker. My colleagues across the aisle say we have a short memory. We don't have a short memory. This has seemed like an eternity the last 2 years. We had no idea as a nation that this much injury could be brought upon our country in this short a period of time. HR2 is the strongest border security package that has ever been brought to the floor in this body. And why has the majority party, the Republicans that were elected into power by the American people last year, why have we drafted this bill over the course of the last year? Carefully and strategically, because we're responding to the total collapse of our sovereignty at the southern border, brought upon America by my colleagues across the aisle. If you want more of what you see on the TV today, then by all means, America can support my Democratic colleagues and their policies, because those are the policies that have brought this disaster upon our nation. HR2 addresses it aggressively. Our southern border is no longer a sovereign border wherein America controls the northern portion and Mexico controls the southern. It's now a theater of engagement controlled by the cartels. HR2 corrects it. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to stand in support of HR2 because it addresses aggressively the injury that our nation suffers, brought upon us by weak, disastrous policies out of the Democrat executive branch, White House, and Democrat majority control for the last 4 years. Mr. Chairman, I urge strong support of HR2, and I yield the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. Is the gentleman from Tennessee reserved? The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the extreme mega Republican Default on America Act, which the last speaker voted for, would result in an across-the-board cut of 22% for the Department of Homeland Security, which would undermine border security. Mr. Speaker, I now yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and this bears an important absolute and imperative necessity of a little walk down memory lane. Actuality, the American people really want to uphold her values, the values that they have come to understand as a core of who we are. The Homeland Security Committee traditionally, as the chairman and I have seen over the years, worked in a bipartisan manner. Little history that just more than a decade ago, there was a bipartisan comprehensive immigration bill led by the late John McCain. Unfortunately, interestingly enough, the Senate moved and the House simply imploded that dream. The dream that those who came to this country without anything and did not know they had come wrongly, if you will, young people could be DACA recipients and ultimately work their way towards citizenship. There was an effective asylum process, and we argued vigorously for legal immigration, and people dutifully got online. But consistently, as we refused to build on the comprehensive immigration structure, even though Democrats supported heavily enhancing the border, my bill some years ago provided enormously new equipment and technology. And one of our colleagues even explained, by the way, this new border wall that everyone wants to talk about is not a border wall because it's indented onto U.S. soil. So once you get over to the wall, you're already eligible to apply for asylum. And most of the people who come through legal points of entry. So why the cruelty of this bill? I can be for legal immigration and I can be for securing this nation, and I don't have to take a sledgehammer and bloody the very fabric of this nation. It is interesting that we offered 43 Democratic amendments. None were accepted. Is there something wrong with body cameras for our officers at the border? Not accepted. Something wrong with refusing to separate 9-month-old and 5-year-old from their families? Family unification, committing to not separating families, is that something wrong? I work with NGOs. I'm in Texas. I'm in Houston. We're getting some of those migrants right in Houston, and there will be an NGO that will be dealing with individuals who are not statused. But what you want to have happen, as is happening in El Paso because of the overwhelming, that you want no resources, you want people on the street, and I'm so sad and shameful to say the loss of individuals in Brownsville in what seemed to be a murderous rage. So we cannot do this, and I urge Republicans to support detaining and deporting more migrants to take a look at Section 115C in Division A. If enacted, it would prohibit DHS.
Time has expired. The gentleman from Mississippi, would you like to yield more of your time?
I yield an additional minute to the gentlelady from Texas.
The gentlelady is recognized for a minute.
Appreciate the gentleman. If 115C in Division A, if enacted, it would prohibit DHS from contracting with any non-governmental organization to transport or shelter, quote, inadmissible aliens, unquote. What is that? This language would prevent ICE from being able to contract with private companies that facilitate deportations or provide detention space because they are non-governmental organizations. Ironically, it seems that this Child Deportation Act may actually undermine our friends on the other side, the MAGA deportation agenda. Why are we not more committed, Mr. Speaker, to coming together around the ideals of the Statute of Liberty? Bring us your forlorn, your worn, your desperate. Yes, they're coming in droves, but the President has a plan. And there will be more interaction with Guatemala. There will be processes in Mexico. There will be more officers at the border for those who are seeking asylum. Why should we reject that? Why don't we come and find a way to stand up the infrastructure? Because a border wall that is $45 billion per inch is not going to be the only solution. I ask my colleagues to take this bill off the floor, go back to the drawing boards, work with those of us in Homeland Security with all of the amendments we offered, and make a reasonable difference in the lives of Americans. And might I put back on the table, because they're all in my office all the time, the DACA recipients need a response. They are paramedics, doctors, lawyers, teachers, How dare we ignore the talent that is here that wants to be a patriotic American? I only ask for mercy. Take the bill back, help our children, make a difference, and honor the Statue of Liberty and protect the national border of this United States of America. We can do it, and it's not being done either by Texas or the United States of America. We want to do it. The people in Houston want to be humanitarians, and they want to be safe. With that, I yield back my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Mississippi reserves.
Gentleman reserves.
Thank you. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Mississippi, the Vice Chair of the Committee on Homeland Security, Mr. Guest.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
I want to thank the chairman. Mr. Speaker, make no mistake, our border is broken. This administration for over 2 years has been unwilling or unable to secure our southern border. Statistics show in FY21, President Biden set a record with 1.9 million encounters. In FY22, he broke that record with 2.7 million encounters. And in FY23, President Biden is on pace to break that record once again. The numbers to my left paint a grim picture of the dire situation along our southern border. And these numbers will only grow worse as Title 42 expires. Republicans from Homeland Security, from Judiciary, from Foreign Affairs have worked together to craft legislation that will combat the border crisis, a crisis created by the failures of this administration. This legislation will hire thousands of new agents, pay retention bonuses to our frontline officers, invest in new technology, construct hundreds of miles of walls and barriers, and will support our local and state partners. Congress must fill the gap of leadership created by the inaction of this administration. We must stop the flow of illegal drugs from pouring into our communities. We must end the flood of immigrants that are coming across each and every day. We must support the hard-working men and women of law enforcement who are on the front lines of this crisis. We will not back down from this fight. And any veto threat by this president be damned, we will deliver security to the American people. With that, I urge support on this measure, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman from Tennessee reserve?
Reserves.
Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Republicans want it both ways. First, they vote to reduce the number of Border Patrol agents in the field by 1,400 under their Default in America Act. And now, all of a sudden, they want to do something different. So either you're for it or you're against it, but you can't have it both ways. Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 3 minutes.
And I'd like to thank the ranking member, Mr. Thompson, for the opportunity to speak here today. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to HR2. During the nearly 17 hours that the Committee on Homeland Security met to consider the border bill offered by Mr. Greens, Democrats offered more than 40 amendments in order to remedy significant shortcomings in the bill. In an effort to offer new provisions to bolster operations at Customs and Border Protection and build up the fiscal year 2023 Omnibus Appropriations Act, which is what we were supposed to be going on, working on the budget that night. Under Democratic leadership, they provide over $17 billion to CBP to not only enhance port of entry operations, but also increase funding to the U.S. Border Patrol by 17%. All of the amendments were rejected by the committee Republicans. Instead of working with Democrats to provide bipartisan solutions to fix our broken immigration system, HR2 is just a far-right MAGA-style immigration bill advanced by Republicans that would tear at the fabric of American values and drastically limiting asylum opportunities while doing nothing to create an orderly system. The xenophobia bill filed in this space of religious values that Republicans claim to live by. At best, HR2 is a deeply distrustful effort to exploit irregular migration at the southwest border, which is expected to intensify with the termination of Title 42 health restrictions, to make political points with Donald Trump and his devoted extreme MAGA base. The hardworking civil servants who work to keep our borders secure deserve so much better. And Mr. Speaker, I urge Republicans who support detaining and deporting more migrants to take a look at Section 115C, Division A. If enacted, it would prohibit DHS from contracting with any non-governmental organizations to transport or shelter, quote, inadmissible aliens, unquote. This language would prevent ICE from being able to contract with private companies that facilitate deportations or provide detention space because they want a non-governmental organization to do it. Now, for the life of me, here we are again. You can't have it both ways. You want all of this deportation to happen, but now you're limiting the organization from doing it. You know, ironically, it seems that the child deportation.
The gentleman will suspend, please. The gentleman will suspend, please. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized. Would you like to yield more time to the gentleman from New Jersey?
Yes, I yield the gentleman an additional 30 seconds.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for another 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, just one last point. You know, ironically, it seems that the Child Deportation Act may actually undermine the extreme MAGA deportation agenda. And listening to my colleague, the ranking member from Mississippi, we've already torn children and babies away from their family. Now it appears that we won't even help women that might be pregnant in this endeavor. I mean, how far do you want to go? And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman from Mississippi reserve?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Jimenez.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the chairman, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of HR2. We have a crisis at our southern border, and when Title 42 expires in just a few hours, that crisis will become a complete catastrophe. In an effort to play petty politics, the Biden administration and Secretary Mayorkas have traded many effective policies implemented by President Trump for chaotic, unorderly, and inhumane immigration. I arrived to the United States with my family shortly after the communist takeover of our native homeland. I understand the plight of many of those who are fleeing socialist regimes in Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua because I, too, am an exile. I, too, am an immigrant. We have legal processes already in place for people to immigrate to America legally and to solicit political asylum legally. But what the Biden administration is doing is offensive, cruel, and inhumane. Lethal fentanyl is flooding our border, killing nearly 100,000 Americans every single year. According to the New York Times, there are over 85,000 migrant children unaccounted for, and many are being subjected to forced labor and child sex trafficking. I repeat, 85,000 unaccounted for children here in the United States. I ask you, is that humane? I think not. The lack of enforcement of our border is incentivizing illegal immigration and enriching corrupt Mexican drug cartels that extort the most vulnerable. While the Biden administration endangers American people, HR2 tackles the crisis head on. This bill resumes construction of the border wall that's needed, increases the number of border agents to 22,000, increases federal grants to local law enforcement in border states, protects migrant children from human trafficking, streamlines the asylum process, and enforces background checks to bar repeat criminal offenders from re-entering our country. HR2 provides a solution to the crisis that President Biden has created. Believe me, he's created it. Secretary Mayorkas and the Biden administration have failed to protect America, and our country is more dangerous than ever before. With that, I urge support of the measure, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman from Tennessee reserve?
Reserve.
Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Congressional Budget Office says the Child Deportation Act would, quote, decrease the population of the United States by about 600,000 people, mostly by reducing the number of unaccompanied children present in the country, unquote. Republicans claim to be concerned about exploitation and abuse of unaccompanied children, but their answer is to slam the doors shut and deport them from the United States. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Goldman.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in opposition to HR2, which is a cruel and draconian bill that demonizes asylum seekers, harms unaccompanied migrant children, and defunds programs that support nonprofit organizations and local governments that are essential to the humane processing of asylum seekers coming to our shores hoping for a better life. And in just a brief response to the gentleman from Florida, our law says that anyone crossing the border anywhere can apply for asylum. So there is no such thing as lawful asylum and unlawful asylum. And in fact, this is an area that we should address in a bipartisan way. We are in desperate need for comprehensive immigration reform. We need thoughtful and effective border security. We need more immigration judges to process asylum applicants. We need more visas for those to enter this country legally. And we need a pathway to citizenship that all of our ancestors have benefited from. But this bill is the opposite of that. It was unilaterally written by House Republicans as a partisan messaging bill with no chance of becoming law. And with this bill, Republicans are putting politics over people. In our committee, Democrats offered more than 30 amendments to try to amend and improve this bill. Every single Republican voted no on every single amendment. One even expressed shock that Democrats would dare to try to change their bill. Sadly, the Republicans rejected one of my amendments that would do more to address border security and fentanyl trafficking than anything else in this bill. An amendment to stop the massive flood of American guns to drug cartels in Mexico. Those same cartels that the chairman from Tennessee says are in control of the border. These guns give the cartels their power, it fuels the violence, and facilitates their illegal trade. Mexico has one gun shop, and it takes months of background checks to purchase a gun. But the latest estimates that we have here are that more than 500,000 American-made guns are exported to Mexico, including assault weapons of war, and many land in the hands of cartels to fuel their human and drug trafficking operation. But there isn't a single mention of guns in HR2, not one. This bill is supposed to be about border security. Our border is broken, as one of my colleagues just said. Well, how can we fix the border when the cartels are ruling it with American guns? Any serious attempt to secure our borders has to address the exportation of more than 500,000 American guns per year to Mexico. But just like the gun violence epidemic
The gentleman from
that is
Mississippi
ravaging...
is recognized. Would you like to yield more time?
30.
Yield the gentleman an additional minute.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for a minute.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Just like the gun violence epidemic that is ravaging our country, Republicans refuse to address the source of the problem. We need comprehensive immigration reform, meaningful solutions to address our broken immigration system, and to live up to our American values. This bill is nothing of the sort. Instead, it turns a real crisis that needs serious solutions into a political messaging tool. I therefore urge my colleagues to vote no, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New York yields. Is the gentleman from Mississippi reserved?
Yes, I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Desjardins.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the chairman and my colleague from Tennessee. Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of HR2. If you watch TV and listen to the administration and Secretary Mayorkas, they would tell you that the border is secure, that the border is not open. In other words, they're telling you to believe what they say and not what you see. Anybody who looks at the border can see the crisis that is there. They can look in their communities and they can see the tragedy that's unfolding with fentanyl. They can look to the sanctuary cities where all the mayors love to say, we'll take anyone, send your immigrants to our cities. Now they're screaming no more. As soon as they got a taste of what the border states are feeling and dealing with every day, they want no more part of it. The toll that this is causing our country is hard to grasp. Look no further than our SNAP program. That everyone wants to expand SNAP and make sure no one goes hungry. I agree that anyone in need should get food, but we cannot get an answer to how many people who are here illegally are on the SNAP program. We've been trying for a year. We've asked Secretary Mayorkas via letter. We've asked Secretary Vilsack via letter how many people who are here illegally or undocumented are on SNAP. We do know that 45% of non-documented households receive SNAP and only 21% of U.S. citizens receive SNAP. And when I bring this up in committee, I'm told it's very hard to get SNAP benefits if you're in the country illegally, but there are several exceptions, more than 11. Two of the main exceptions are, one, if you're under 18, you automatically qualify. We all know how many children are coming across the border. They're receiving SNAP benefits. The other is if you're seeking asylum. Well, who's coming here that is not seeking asylum? I heard the gentleman mention that anyone can claim asylum, but what we're seeing here is not true asylum seeking. It is what they're told to say because they know that's the clearest pathway into the country. And people are just simply being released in record numbers. 5-6 million people have come into our country illegally. And you know who hates illegal immigration more than any of us? People who did it right. We have the most generous immigration system in the world. Almost 1 million per year can come here legally. We're letting millions in illegally, and the people who do it right resent that.
Time has expired.
So I urge adoption
additional
of this
30 seconds.
important.
The gentleman
Thank
is
you, Chairman.
recognized.
The
Gentleman will suspend, please.
Yes, sir.
The gentleman is recognized for another 30 seconds.
I thank the Speaker. So, I urge support of this measure because we are a country of laws, and it's not right to allow your first measure in entering this country to be something illegal. And it flies in the face of all the people who did it correctly. And thank God that we have a chairman like Chairman Green who is addressing this issue. It should be a bipartisan issue. Everyone's feeling it. And it's time that we act. And I thank the Republicans for bringing this forward. It's important, and I strongly support it.
Gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman from Tennessee reserve?
Gentleman reserves.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, on March 15th, Border Patrol Chief Ortiz told the Homeland Security Committee that, quote, cartels control an awful lot of the southern border south of the United States, unquote. Last time I checked, south of the United States meant Mexico, and not 5 of 9 U.S. Border Patrol sectors. I now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the gentleman from Mississippi for yielding. I rise today to discuss H.R. 2, the House Republicans' border bill that fails to fix our broken immigration system. I have been to our southern border twice since January because I do believe it is important that we experience those challenges firsthand. And despite there being an immense amount of work to do at our border, this legislation fails to meet the moment. Instead of solutions, Republicans want a wall that would immediately be obsolete upon completion and would only serve as a painful reminder of the Republicans' failed border policies. A wall that would cost almost $25 million per mile to complete, resulting in a total bill to the American taxpayers of over $11 billion. For a party that talks about wasteful government spending, how can this possibly be the best use of our taxpayer dollars? I and my colleagues on Homeland Security offered numerous amendments to this bill to address some of its core deficiencies. When I offered an amendment to strike this wasteful spending on an inefficient wall, it was rejected by every single Republican. Operation Blue Lotus, a Biden administration program, has stopped over 4,000 pounds of fentanyl from being brought into the U.S., has led to dozens of arrests and the seizure of thousands of pounds of illicit drugs. And yet, when I offered an amendment to provide congressional authorization for this successful program, it was rejected again by every single Republican. So even on the issues that Republicans talk most about, like fentanyl, this bill fails to address those challenges. And even worse, this bill treats migrants as our enemies instead of our neighbors, who are simply looking to give their families the opportunities to be hopeful about their tomorrows, to give them their fair shot at their American dream, the fair shot that all of our families were given by this country. And this bill also seeks to punish nonprofits and NGOs who, by caring for our most vulnerable neighbors, reflect the best of who we are as a country. Organizations like Catholic Charities who feed, house, and take care of migrants could lose federal funding by simply fulfilling their spiritual mission of supporting those most in need. Democrats offered amendments to ensure that NGOs would not be penalized for providing services to pregnant women, to children, to families, and each amendment failed because not a single Republican was willing to stand up and vote for it. This should not be who we are as a country. But if this bill becomes law, it will say to the world, this is who we've become. I am a no on HR2, and I urge all my colleagues to do the same. I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman from Mississippi reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, the Speaker of the House, United States House of Representatives, Mr. McCarthy.
The Speaker is recognized.
I want to thank you, Mr. Speaker, but I want to thank Chairman Green for his work. Mr. Green, when we took the majority and you became chairman, you didn't sit in Washington to figure out what the problem was. You actually took your committee to the border to see firsthand. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the ranking member on the other side wouldn't attend. But he stands up, speaker after speaker, thinking he knows what's happening on the border from far away of Washington. You know, I've been to the border 4 times in the past 3 years. I've seen the fear in the eyes of the ranchers who's had their property broken into. I've heard the frustration in the voice of the Border Patrol agents who are stretched to the limit. 2.5 years ago when I went to the border, I sat with the agents in El Paso. They told me they saw something different that they haven't seen before. They were actually catching people on the terrorist watch list. I came down, I had a press conference. I announced what they told me. I would have thought, Mr. Speaker, the members on the other side of the aisle, knowing what has happened at 9/11 and others, that they would rise up in a united front to protect America. You know what I heard from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle? They said I was lying. They said they had as much security clearance as I did. That it must be not true. Because you see, in Washington, they thought they knew all, but they didn't go to the border to actually talk to the people who work right there. Interesting as though The next day, the administration had to say it was true. You know what the administration did then? Withheld the information from Congress so they could no longer find out how many people we would catch on the terrorist watch list. They wanted to deny to know what's going forward. So to my good friend on the other side of the aisle, the ranking member of Homeland Security, I'm sure you know that in the month of February, do you know that we caught more people on the terrorist watch list in this 1 month, in the last entire time of the last administration? In the last administration, 4 years of everybody that came across on the terrorist watch list, this February, more came across. I'm sure from the far away, you might probably think that's not true too. You know, I felt the sorrows in the words of the mothers and fathers who lost their children to fentanyl. And you know what? You can stay in Washington if you want, and you will still hear the sorrows of the mothers and the fathers. Today alone, 300 Americans will be poisoned by fentanyl. 300. It's the equivalent of an airline crashing each and every day in America. I don't hear you rising up. Every day, 300. They come from all walks of life. But you want to stand and you want to say no to HR2? I want you to look to the parents in the eyes of their young children. Because they didn't buy fentanyl when they died. They were at college. They bought Xanax. And it doesn't just happen to you think the kids, maybe in the partying or others. You know, just last year on spring break, 6 kids OD'd in Florida. They didn't belong to a fraternity. They went to West Point. They didn't buy fentanyl. They all didn't take the cocaine. 4 of them did. The other 2 simply gave them mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. But you know what? Vote no. Go ahead, vote no. But if you won't lead, we will. If you want to take the same approach as the president, that you want to ignore a problem and say it's not happening, we won't sit back. We don't sit back in Washington. We go to the border to actually see what's going on. We listen, we learn, and then we sit in committee. Even though your committee went and had a hearing, I'm sure you're very proud. You protested, you didn't go. Who lost? More Americans lost. More Americans will die by your actions. For their sake and for our nation's safety, we must secure our border. This is President Biden's record on the border. Record crossings, record carelessness, record chaos. More than 11,000 people were caught yesterday crossing the border illegally. The highest single-day total ever. But I look forward to hearing what the ranking member's quote is coming forward. Maybe he'll quote the secretary that the border's secure. Believe him, you're sitting in Washington. And what will the administration's plan for these 11,000? According to NBC News, the plan is brilliant. Listen to it. It's to release many of them into the United States. No court dates, no way to track them. Because that worked so well in the past. Just ask the 85,000 children the Biden administration lost. I look forward to hearing the other side get up and tell me why they're voting no. Because they don't want to find these 85,000? Don't take my word for it. This comes from the New York Times. Tomorrow, as you sit here and debate and fight to make sure the border is still wide open, Title 42 expires. Everyone knows we are days away from disaster. The mayor of El Paso, which recently declared a state of emergency, says there's no light at the end of the tunnel. We are preparing for the unknown. The governor of Arizona says President Biden has been unresponsive.
And Governor Abbott of Texas rightly pointed out, this is not a Texas problem. This is a problem for the entire United States. You know, I heard President Biden say yesterday that lifting Title 42 means it's going to be chaotic for a little while. With all due respect, Mr. President, it's been chaotic for the 2 years because of your actions. When President Biden took office, on the very day he decided against the advice of the border security experts to single-handedly remove the successful border policies of the previous administrations. The first thing President Biden did, he stopped construction of the border wall. He spends money now just to house the equipment and materials. He halted deportations. He ended Remain in Mexico, and he called for amnesty for millions of people who broke the law. His actions sent a clear message to the world, including the cartels. The border is open. I remember on one of my trips down to the border right after the president took office, we had a new facility built, and they hit that day a record number that the facility, they thought they'd never make capacity, but they did. And as we walked in, we interviewed those who were standing in line, and we asked them, why did they come? They said, President Biden told us to. He told us the border was open. We asked, how long was the stretch? Weeks, months. But the president invited us. The world listened, and the cartels acted. To this day, the southern border is flooded by illegal aliens from more than 140 countries. Yemen, Russia, China, and others. Yet how has this administration responded? A responsible administration would have told the American people in clear terms, this is a crisis. But the Biden administration tells the public that there is no crisis. Rather than leveling with the American people, the Biden administration is choosing to mislead them. I don't know if the ranking leader has ever been to Tucson, Arizona, but I was there recently. You know, in Tucson, Arizona, the cartels control the border. Every single person who comes across that border is wearing a camouflage outfit. On their feet and on their shoes is a piece of rug. 71% who come across that border are single males. They don't run up to the border agents. They run from them. It's one of the highest areas of getaways. It's a large terrain. Every day, Americans risk their lives to go rescue people on the cliffs that have fallen. We took balloons up so we could actually calculate who's coming across. When this became such a reported case, you know what the Biden administration did? They cut the number of balloons. You know why? Because they said the numbers will go down. That's how they want to deal with it. They want to lie to the American public. There's no better example than Secretary Mayorkas' comments that the border is secure. Mr. Speaker, I hope the ranking member gets up after me, and I would like him to answer one question. Does he believe, Secretary Mayorkas, that the border is secure? You've been chairman. You're ranking now. I'm sure sometime you went to the border, but not when your committee did. Not when we wanted to work on this bill. You wanted to protest. You wanted to not go because you could learn everything you needed from right here in Washington, maybe from the secretary. I'd like to know how many of you who stand up and say you're going to vote against HR2 believe Secretary Mayorkas. Do you believe the border is secure? Just honestly tell us. Tell the American public if that's what you believe. Everyone knows that isn't true. You can't say the border is secure when more than 4.5 million people have crossed our border illegally in the 24 months since President Biden has taken office. There's not one piece of legislation has changed from one administration to the other. The only thing that changed was the president. And what did President Biden do? He lifted all the actions of President Trump and President Obama. And that's what happened to our border. You can't say the border is secure when more than 175 individuals on the terrorist watch list have tried to cross our border. You can't say the border is secure when human trafficking has grown into a multi-billion-dollar business for the cartels. You can't say the border is secure when you don't control the border and when the number one employer in some of these border towns is the cartel. You can't say the border is secure when I sit there with mayors. They happen to be from the other party. And they tell me the personal stories that their daughter called. And he told her not to go outside because there was a car chase. A car chase because a cartel hired a young American to drive somebody they put across. The car was going through, and it's not an unusual thing. It happens often. Schools there, they would tell me, had to close 45 days. But this car chase ended like others. Killed an innocent American. This innocent American was going to a retirement party. 65 years old grandmother. Going to have her friends celebrate a life of work, looking forward to the times with all the work and investment she put in to spend with her grandchildren and travel. But no, her life was taken from her. And the secretary said our border is secure. If you would travel to these towns, you would know this too. If you'd spend the time, you'd understand. You see, many of those elected officials aren't Republicans. They're Americans. They're registered as Democrats. And they say they're disgusted by what this administration is doing. But while the Biden administration is missing in actions, House Republicans are going to take action. We spent 2 years listening to those who have lived through the border crisis. Border Patrol agents, ranchers, families, businesses, and local leaders. When I was in Tucson, I sat with a rancher. He's told me he's found 5 dead bodies on his ranch. His grandson, 7 years old, found one just last year. This is human life. 52 died in a tractor trailer. I sat with one. He told me the story when he looked down the road, saw 3 young children. One not even 1, the other 3, and the other 4. Had the rancher not found them, they wouldn't be alive. What about those who don't make it? What about those who don't pay the cartels? I sat with one news covering agent, told the story of a woman who didn't pay the cartels. So the cartels took her life. They didn't just take her life, they wanted to show it to everybody in the world. So they strung her body up in a tree, cut her legs off, put her on fire. You see, if you go to the border, you'll learn these stories. You'll actually know what's happening there. So I don't think you'd take a partisan position. You wouldn't talk in talking points. You'd actually believe if 4.5 million people in the last year came across, if 11,000 came across yesterday, Title 42 is going to be lifted. If you don't like our bill, what's your answer? What's your plan? What are you going to do? As I promised, we brought their government to them, visiting the border, gathering facts, and holding hearings. What we learned directly from informed not only our commitment to America, but also the Secure the Border Act. Here's what this bill does. It fully provides for the effective border enforcement policies, infrastructure, and advanced technology. It increases the number of Border Patrol agents and gives them the bonus pay they deserve. It ends catch and release and strengthens current laws to protect unaccompanied children from the human traffickers. I hope everybody who votes no reads the New York Times. I hope you read the stories about these young children. It reinstates the so-called Remain in Mexico provisions, and it resumes construction of the border wall, because the border wall works. The Secure the Border Act is the strongest border security bill to come through Congress in more than 100 years. If it passes, I'm confident that we will stop the flood of fentanyl into our country, solve the Biden border crisis, and support our Border Patrol agents so they can continue to keep us safe. Fentanyl is the #1 killer of Americans between the ages of 18 and 45. If anybody thinks about their life between the ages of 18 and 45, those are the years you reproduce. Those are your most productive years in business. Those are the years of those who volunteer to serve in the military, defend our freedom. And right now, the most productive population age in our country is being killed. But I listen to the other side, they're going to say, no, continue it. By the actions of this president, Mr. Ranking Member, you don't have to go to the border, because now every city is a border city. You see, in my hometown of Bakersfield, in elementary school, father registered his son just after Thanksgiving. School district, public school, did a really good job. They noticed in 2 days this boy had an issue. They didn't sit back. They went to his house. They met with his father. They said, we feel your son has a challenge learning in others, and we want to work with you. We want to help him. Literally went to his house in 2 days. They watched him as they came to school, but you know what he did when he came to school? He walked over to a vape room. He had a backpack, and he came into the class. They looked in the backpack. He had 150 pills. This kid's not even 16 years old. I think he was only 12. The counselor took out the pill to see what it was. They had to call an ambulance because the counselor touched the fentanyl pill. I'm far from the border. Just up the road in my district, they pulled over a car. I believe it was more than 500,000 fentanyl pills. California law, you couldn't ask the individuals if they were citizens, and they weren't. I can't tell you how much jail time they got, because in California, they believe in a lot of your policies. And so the person didn't even have to have bail. They both got a ticket, told to show back up. They never did. They probably got back in the car, delivered more of those fentanyl pills coming across the border. And some of those 300 Americans that die today, I'm not sure if one of those pills were theirs. But I do know this. Tomorrow when I cast a yes vote for HR2, we're doing something to stop the fentanyl. We're doing something for those families. We're doing something for the next generation of America. If you believe in a rule of law as one of the greatest strengths of this nation, you cannot keep it if you have millions of people who break it by entering it. There's no nation as generous as America. 1 million people will become citizens this year. 1 million more next year. We're different than any other nation. But what we have today is something that we don't even control, our own operation of our borders. I urge all my colleagues to vote yes on Secure the Border Act. Vote yes on security over chaos, and vote yes to stop the fentanyl killing our children. With that, I yield back.
Members are reminded to address the remarks through the chair and not to each other in the second person. The gentleman from Tennessee reserves.
Reserve.
The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at some point, you have to correct the record. You know, we had a debt ceiling budget vote several weeks ago. The Republican approved debt ceiling budget would cut the DHS budget by 22%. So you can't be for something, but you don't invest in what you say you're for. I'll step back a little further and say that if Republicans are really serious about border security, they would have joined Democrats in passing last year's government funding bill. It provided more than $17 billion to Customs and Border Protection alone, and a 17% increase in the Border Patrol budget. But unfortunately, Speaker McCarthy voted against that too. Democrats have been to the border. I took 9 members in April of this year to the border. We talked to a lot of people. I've been on the committee quite a while. I've gone to the border in a number of times to see. So one visit you didn't go to is not the end of the world. I was on the border before the Speaker was in Congress. So there's history here that we just need to make sure that we all understand. Mr. Speaker, I now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to say that most of my life I've lived on both sides of the border. And since taking over my subcommittee this year, I've gone to, last 4 months, Laredo, Brownsville, Yuma, El Centro, San Isidro, Otay, and just Monday, Otay, Tijuana, Mexico. I'm doing this because I think it's important that we leave Washington and go and ask the border agents, go ask the port authorities what's going on. Tell me what you need. Saw these men and women in blue uniforms at our ports of entry. They're very proud of their work, and they said, Lou, look, this is 99% of the trade we have. The integration of the North American markets, we are making it happen thanks to the investments by Congress in personnel, technology, and infrastructure. Then they said, but we have to keep out that 1%, that fentanyl, those narcotics. And they proudly said, we here, the ports of entry, are responsible for stopping 90% of the fentanyl that comes into this country. And I asked them, of course, what do you need to do your job better? They said, we are looking to you in Washington for more support. We're 2,400 personnel down, CBP agents, and they said, your proposals here by my colleagues on the other side do nothing to support the additional hiring of men and women in blue uniforms. Those blue uniforms are responsible for stopping 95% of the fentanyl that's coming across the border. I proposed amendments to this legislation for better pay, retention, child care. For those workers, they have to do forced overtime. All my amendments were turned down. If we are serious about stopping fentanyl, we have to invest more in those blue uniforms, and this legislation does absolutely nothing to do that. Let's be frank here, folks. I've also gone to farmers and small businesses in my district, and they're also very scared. They're scared from becoming criminals. You put in a mandatory E-Verify, and every one of those farmers that employ undocumented farm workers is going to be criminalized. Every one of those small businesses in my district that is calling me and saying, Lou, we need immigration reform, they will also become criminals because they employ undocumented. We seem to forget we have a 3.6% unemployment rate in this country. Those folks that are coming across the border, They're disappearing into the fabric of our economic society. They're getting jobs. They are working. They're part of our fabric. Unless we have immigration reform, unless we have a way to get workers into this country that's teamed up with some of these proposals, it's not going to work. At the end of the day, the private sector that needs workers,
Expired.
folks that need a job, we'll figure out how to make it work.
Mr. Speaker, I yield an additional minute to the Speaker.
The gentleman is recognized for an additional minute.
Mr. Speaker, this bill is not enough. This bill is not about solving a solution. It's simply messaging. You're not addressing the fentanyl problem. The best investment are where you know it will be stopped at the border. You're not addressing the employment issue in every sector of our economy, in every state in our union. We need workers. We don't need to criminalize, make employers criminal for trying to hire somebody to harvest this crop. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and I yield.
And from Mississippi reserves?
Gentleman reserves.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. D'Esposito, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of HR2, the Secure the Border Act. And I must say that I find it, Mr. Speaker, quite comical and a little bit scary that we just heard that this bill is nothing more than, quote, messaging. Because when I was sitting in this seat, I was wondering for a moment if we were debating a bill or having some juvenile partisan contest about how many times we could say MAGA and extreme, which have nothing to do with this bill. What is extreme, however, is the unprecedented levels of illegal migrants, fentanyl, and other deadly drugs that have come across our open border. This week, Title 42 ends, and we still have heard no plan from the White House on how they plan to deal with the levels of illegal migrants that continue daily to travel across our southern border. House Republicans are delivering where President Biden refuses to. The Secure the Border Act will help us regain operational control of the border, combat illegal immigration, and stop fentanyl smugglers. This legislation will support the brave men and women serving as members of the Border Patrol by hiring an additional 22,000 Border Patrol agents. This hiring blitz will allow Border Patrol agents to return to their law enforcement mission in the field and not simply act as processing coordinators. We will be providing incentives, solidifying institutional knowledge, and help with the mass exodus caused by the dereliction of duty of Secretary Mayorkas. Additionally, this bill will end controversial catch-and-release policy, which puts migrants into communities while awaiting their hearings. The Secure the Border Act will also increase transparency over federal government and strengthen current law to protect unaccompanied children at the border from human trafficking. We've heard about these amendments. There were amendments about a border that we were told by Democrats was secure.
I yield the gentleman an additional 30.
Gentleman is recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
And instead of focusing on our border, these amendments focused on challenge coins, climate change, and about moments in a news cycle. Well, to my friends on the other side of the aisle, that news cycle is devastating to many. Devastating to those who have now been at the hands of the cartel. Devastated to those who have lost children and grandchildren to fentanyl. And while the Biden administration is ignoring the safety and security of our county and our country, House Republicans are delivering on our commitment to a nation that is safe. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Tennessee reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the extreme MAGA Republican Default on America Act, which the last speaker voted for, would result in CBP not being able to seize nearly 900 pounds of fentanyl because of the draconian cuts to its budget. I now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Garcia.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the gentleman for yielding time. Now, I rise today in strong opposition to this un-American and cruel bill. Now, I immigrated to this country as a small child, and I love our country for all it has provided me and my family. Immigrants love this country. They dedicate their lives to working, and they make our community stronger. This bill does not uphold our values as a nation. A bill that was true to those values would uplift and celebrate the contributions of immigrants. Real patriots know that love of country is actually about helping people. And let's be crystal clear. We all want a safe and secure border. And the best way to achieve that is through comprehensive immigration reform and creating legal pathways for people who want to come here to work. Sadly, this bill does not do that. Instead, it doubles down on a failed anti-immigrant agenda. This bill guts the fundamental right to seek asylum. It strips protections for unaccompanied children, and it wastes more money on Donald Trump's pointless border wall, a monument to hate which does nothing to protect us. Now, in the Homeland Security Committee, I helped lead the fight against harmful provisions of this bill that target nonprofits who partner with our border agencies for care and for our asylum seekers. But House Republicans are moving ahead with these disastrous policies that would require charities to check the immigration status of those who need care, even in a crisis. By defunding nonprofits, this cold-hearted bill would ignore what the gospel teaches us. It ignores our brothers and sisters who are tired, poor, hungry, and sick. Those who need the most in their time of need. If this bill ever becomes law, it would cause chaos and suffering. We need real immigration reform, and America is ready for that debate. Let's rise to the occasion and create an America that reflects kindness and centers on helping people. Being anti-immigrant is being anti-American. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Mississippi reserves.
Gentleman reserves.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I recognize for 3 minutes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Strong.
Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of HR2, the Secure the Border Act. This legislation is the culmination of months of hard work and collaboration of 3 House committees, Homeland Security, of which I serve as a member, Judiciary, and Foreign Affairs. It represents what is possible when we work together for the good of our nation. In my very first floor speech as a member of Congress, I echoed the concerns and fears I've heard from the constituents that I represent and what I've seen firsthand at the southern border. Americans are not safe, and our country is under attack at the southern border. Illegal immigration, drug runners, and human smugglers continue to exploit this administration's open southern border policy as this administration looks the other way. This last weekend, in just 72 hours, Border Patrol apprehended over 26,000 migrants, had approximately 7,500 gotaways, and seized 11 pounds of fentanyl, enough to kill 2.5 million Americans. If this is what operational control looks like to this administration, it's no wonder why Americans are worried. Title 42 is set to expire tomorrow, bringing not a surge, but an invasion of illegal immigrants that our communities, hospitals, schools, and law enforcement officials simply can't handle. This debacle created by this administration has not seen its worst day. Just this morning, the administration released a statement outlining how they plan to deal with this incoming invasion. The Department of Homeland Security press release says they have finalized a rule to incentivize the use of lawful immigration pathways. They are choosing to incentivize illegal immigrants to follow our laws when we should be punishing those that don't follow our laws. The fact is, President Trump's border policies work for America. Now more than ever, we must pass this legislation and move toward a lawful, safe, secure, and orderly border. We don't have time to waste. Among many important provisions, this legislation would grant DHS authority to suspend entry and gain operational control of the border, similar to Title 42. I'm pleased to stand here today with my colleagues in support of this legislation that begins to address the massive failure of this administration. H.R. 2 reflects Republicans' commitment to make America safer. I urge my colleagues to support this bill. It is up to us to stop this invasion of America at the southern border because no one else will. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Tennessee reserves. Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, on February 1st, the last speaker voted against the public health emergency that served as the legal basis for the use of Title 42 at the southwest border. My colleagues want to have it both ways, which is why I guess he supports H.R. 2, the Child Deportation Act. I now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, the ranking member of the Natural Resources Committee.
Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and let me thank the gentleman from Mississippi for yielding. I happen to represent every border community and every port of entry along the Arizona-Mexico border. My home, I grew up, and that's where I live, and that's where I've lived, is in those borderlands. I don't need a photo op tour for me to understand, to feel, and to respect the fact that these communities and this area of our nation has been left behind not just by policy, but by intent. H.R. 2 is not serious legislation to address our urgent need to fix our broken immigration system and to respond to the pending humanitarian crisis on our border, to combat the deadly flow of fentanyl and human exploitation by organized crime syndicates. It won't do that. But what H.R. 2 will do, it will devastate our affordable food supply by eliminating up to half the workforce in agriculture, farming, and ranching. It will dramatically increase the economic hardship of border communities and the borderlands. It will fund the Trump Memorial Wall, a piece of useless government waste. It will demonize children and unaccompanied youth, and it will provide Republicans with the fundraising tools, and it will also provide them with a means to create division, fear, and chaos in preparation for the 2024 elections. My Republican colleagues hope that voters will overlook their growing extremism and their failure to deal with real issues in this Congress, one of them being immigration. The lifting of Title 42 challenges Republicans in this House to do more than political posturing. And yes, indeed, challenges the Biden administration not to allow the pending humanitarian crisis to become desperate and punitive. I want to also take a little historic look and remind the body of the schizophrenic anti-immigrant underpinnings of H.R. 2. The echoes of past immigration debates in this chamber are with us today, and let me quote from the congressional record. In 1884, Congressman Henley of California spoke on the floor on the need to preserve a white man's government from dark and yellow-skinned people. In 1924, Congressman Wilson of Louisiana said, "Two things are certain. One is that America cannot exist with a large percentage of mongrel communities with different views and aspirations." That same year, Representative Robinson of Kentucky said, "Let us send out the slackers and undesirables. Let us clean up America and keep America clean for the real Americans and for the real country." And I mentioned those historical realities and facts from previous debates to underline the point that H.R. 2 must not be a means to grow the worst native impulses that we might have in this Congress, or to accept ethnic and racial prejudices.
Mr. Speaker, I yield the gentleman another minute.
The gentleman is recognized for an additional minute.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. All to further and to accept ethnic and racial prejudices as criteria in our immigration laws and policies, bringing to life those echoes of the past. The values and the common ground that must be found in order to effectively deal with the issue of immigration, with the issue of asylum seekers and refugee seekers, requires real solutions. It requires humanitarian relief, but it also requires an enforcement focus that deals with the issues that have been talked about by the other side: fentanyl, the drug running, human exploitation. But it also requires that all of us in Congress, and particularly those that represent the borderlands, be included in those discussions to the point that we can bring the real voices, the real impulses, and the real needs of those communities, and not treat HR2 must be defeated because it is against our values and it promotes a mythology that everything that happens on that southern border